And welcome everybody right here to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. Hope you have a great time. And thank you for taking the time to be with us. I want to thank those also listening from around the world. We appreciate each and every one of you. And if you're listening from somewhere other than here in the chat room, feel free to come on over to para-x.com. Click on the live chat button and you'll be in with all these wonderful people. You'll be able to interact with them and interact with us by asking us with questions for our guest. Oh, we have had great week. Last week we did a replay of our 4th of July show from last year. So all of us actually had a week off. Well, most everybody. I ended up having to be here. But anyway, everybody had a great time. And we got lots of stuff that's going to be coming up and going on and everything. And tonight we have a great show. Tonight we have with us Cat Cloco.
Hello, everyone. I got my voice back.
Well, good.
Just in time for the show.
You had hot tea?
Did you use the marshmallows?
I didn't eat any marshmallows. I had tea and anti-inflammatory medicine.
Good.
So
And
that's what cured me.
we have Barbara Duncan.
Good evening, everyone.
All right. And we got Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello.
All right.
Hope everybody on their head.
Are you breaking up again, Jeff?
Am I? No, I didn't even have a girlfriend.
Oh no.
Oh,
Yeah, you're breaking up, Jeff.
sounds fine. You guys sound fine to me.
You
You want me to try again or call me back in, then I'll do the bio?
if you want to try that, do that, and we'll see if that'll work better.
Okay. Thomas Wertman. He's the former chief field investigator for MUFON of Ohio and currently the co-director of the project, the oldest UFO organization in the country. His interest in UFOs and science fiction began with the 60s B movies, so hopefully he's a Mystery Science Theater fan as well. This summer, Thomas has been doing the quest of libraries around northern Ohio in cases of which so welcome Thomas Wertman. Sorry.
Hey, thank you. I'm glad to be here tonight.
As his microphone is breaking up badly.
What, his or mine?
No, yours.
Oh, okay. Yeah, call me back in then. Yeah.
Well, go ahead and drop off. I'll call you back in.
Jeff is only turning into a Cyberman just in time for the San Diego Comic-Con.
Oh, yeah.
Do I have to disconnect?
Yeah, no, you go ahead and drop off.
How do I? Oh, okay.
Okay. Now, I'll wait a second, then I'll call him back in, and hopefully his will be working good. Maybe he'll have a little bit better connection. We do want to take time, though, to thank you for taking the time to be with us on such short notice, Thomas. So, I want to thank you.
Oh, no problem. I'm glad to be here. I mean, where else could I be on a nice sunny night, along the lake? But maybe drinking a beer with my feet in the water,
I miss Lake Erie. Yeah.
But I enjoy being on shows like this, and it's no problem whatsoever. I really enjoy it. And I thank you for the opportunity.
Well, it's our pleasure because it's been a while since we've done a show on UFOs and aliens. And Jeff, you back now?
Yeah. Am I sounding better or worse?
No, you sound a little bit better as long as you don't start breaking up.
Stay from Talos.
Okay, well, we'll find out as you start talking.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I want to remind everybody that if you do have questions, you can private chat them to Ceiling Cat, co-host Cloco, myself, and Jeffrey Gould is not in the chat room, so...
Not yet. I will. I'm kind of running around here.
Okay. He will be then. You can do that. And if you're not here in the chat room with us, but you're somewhere else around the world, you can still ask questions by sending a question to the paranormalview@gmail.com, and we will get that question right over to our guest.
You can also tweet them over to us at Paraview Radio on Twitter.
We just have all sorts of different ways.
Yes.
If you also have a pigeon around, you can tie something to its leg.
I can't guarantee you if it lands around this house, one of our outdoor cats will get it. So,
Kat, you got an announcement. You want to do that first before we get
yeah. So for everyone who's interested, we have an event announcement. Where did it go? There it is. Mid-Ohio is July 17th through the 19th at Poasttown Elementary School, 6600 Trenton Franklin Road, Middletown, Ohio. Our friends Rick Hayes, Rosalind Bound, and the Louisville Ghost Hunter Society with Keith Age will be there, plus many more. Check out their Facebook group at Mid-Ohio or visit www.louisvilleghs.com for more information and ticket info. It's a great event. Henry, will you be there?
I'm going to be there.
Awesome!
Are you coming?
And I won't be able to go. But
okay.
Also, if you know of any paranormal events, it can be ghost events, it can be UFO symposiums like the one that MUFON just had, what was it, June 6th, or any other event such as that, please let us know and write to us at our email, which, what is it, Henry? The paranormalview@gmail.com.
Right.
Yeah. Or you can always message one of us on Facebook, and we can announce it on air. So please let us know.
Yes. Now let's get to, because I'm sure that 2 hours is going to go by real fast talking about this. And we was talking with you just a little bit before we got on the air, Thomas. Has there been any recent activity in Ohio of UFO sightings?
We've actually had quite a bit. In the last few years, we've averaged probably about 270 cases coming in a year just in Ohio alone, and that's reported in MUFON.
Wow.
But this year it looks like right now we're hitting a surge, and parts because of the 4th of July holidays and stuff. But it looks like we're hitting a surge of sightings. And we've got some under investigation right now that I can't go into. Mm-hmm. But we had some, especially ones that are finished up that I did, especially last fall, going into this year. One of my particular favorites was one that involved missing time with 2 witnesses down in Salt Fork State Park.
Oh.
And Kat, I knew that would get a rise of you, Kat, when I mentioned Salt Fork.
Yeah. Well, also just missing time stories. Those are always interesting because we have them in like ghost investigations too with people with missing time. So I always find it interesting when we find those similarities between all these different paranormal studies.
Oh,
so please go on.
Oh, this is a great one. It started out with MUFON when somebody has a sighting or something along this lines of missing time. They can turn it into our website, which is at www.mufon.com. And an individual on the night of August 24th and 30th was out fishing. Mm-hmm. And when they were out fishing down at Salt Fork, these 2 individuals were just like creatures of habit. Mm-hmm. They went out in the evening. They set up their camp. They had a fire built. They had a canopy put up. Mm-hmm. And their fishing poles, if you get this visualization, their fishing poles were propped up right on the edge of the water. Mm-hmm. They had glow sticks rubber banded to them on there so you could watch their poles all night long. Mm-hmm. And it's just kind of like a normal night. You're just kind of sitting out there, just relaxing. One of the individuals is in his early 40s. The second one is about 19. And the 19-year-old is the boyfriend of the 40-year-old's daughter.
Okay.
And these 2 individuals had, a relationship to me that was almost closer than father and son because they knew each other so much inside and out. Mm-hmm. Almost to the point of one could start a sentence, the other one could finish it. They had that type of bond between them. Well, they'd set up camp on this night, and things were kind of going normal. And every half hour, they had a routine where they would go and rebait their hooks because they always had to have fresh bait on their hooks every half hour.
Mm-hmm.
They also went back and put logs on their fire every half hour. And what was interesting is they played a little game where they would take and guess how close they could come to the half-hour time frame.
Okay.
And it was like a little thing, okay, are we there yet? No, we're not there yet. And they hadn't done it just this one night, but they'd been doing it all the times they'd been down at the state park.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd had, I forget how many hundreds of hours, they said, fishing at this state park. So it wasn't like the first time.
Mm-hmm.
So they have this routine going all along until about 10:30. They happen to look to their north, and they see some lights drifting back and forth, low just above the tree lines. The lights weren't as bright as the moon, but they weren't as small as Venus. They were kind of like a size in between. Well, they watched them for a few minutes, and then they kind of said, okay, let's go back fishing. There's nothing really happening with those. And they just started watching their fishing poles again and going through their normal actions. Mm-hmm. And about 11:30 then, they noticed the lights back in the same region of the sky. This time they traveled farther back and forth to their north, again staying low along the tree lines, again, similar intensity. They watched them for a while, then they said, let's just go back to fishing. Mm-hmm. So they kind of just ignored them. Then it got to be about in this case, 1:30 in the morning, they heard this shrill voice that sounded like a female to their south. And when I talked to a friend of mine about it, again, here's one for you, Kat. Talked to one of my friends, he goes, oh, that's Bigfoot. That's Bigfoot, without a doubt, because all Bigfoot sound like female and they have a shrill voice. And that was one because Salt Fork's full of Bigfoot down there. Well, I'm a little bit more cautious than that. But they said, they'd heard his female voice. And about 15 minutes later, they'd almost pulled up camp to leave because that voice freaked them out so bad. Now, here's two individuals who'd been in a state park hundreds of hours. Right. And all of a sudden, this shrill voice spooked them so bad they almost left. Mm-hmm. About 15 minutes later, they remembered the 19-year-old was baiting his hook, and the 40-year-old was sitting in a chair. And next thing you know, the 40-year-old looks at his cell phone and says, "Hey, dude, you're not going to believe this, dude." Mm-hmm. He goes, "It's 5:19 in the morning."
Whoa!
So it went from 1:30 to 5:19 in the morning. They have no clue what happened. The 19-year-old was still standing by his pole where he was at 1:30, and he goes, "There is no way on this earth I would have stood by this pole for 2 hours and 45 minutes, basically. There's no way." They turned around. The fire was completely burned out.
Wow.
There was nothing left of it. They couldn't even put wood back on and get it started again. They had to put kindling on and get it going from scratch.
Wow.
So they're freaking out, of course, which anybody would do if you couldn't realize what you did for that long a time. Mm-hmm. And next thing you know, they panicked. They threw everything back in their truck, took their campsite down, and headed back home. Well, when they got back home, it had to be about 7 going on 8, that was when they notified MUFON about their event.
Wow.
And MUFON got in touch with me right away because we have a group that they call the STAR team. Mm-hmm. When you have high-profile cases that come in, we've got some great investigators in the state of Ohio, but not just Ohio, but across the country. When something comes in like this, it's a much higher profile. We want basically some of the best on these cases. And they called me right away and said, "We need you to get in touch with these individuals. Talk to them about their story. Record it right away." And that's exactly what happened. I got a report in from our national office, which is out in California. Mm-hmm. They sent me the details of the event. I called the witnesses up, and I took them. They were totally freaking out on the phone even. They were just so nervous, and they had no clue what happened. We talked the events over, and I said, could we get together, discuss it more in detail, or better yet, can we go right back down to the state park that same night? So what it is, I talked him into going back down to the state park. And we relived all the events that happened to him that evening before. And they went through everything, setting basically to the point of almost setting their canopy up. They reenacted that, putting their chairs where they were, putting their fishing poles back, everything. Then reenacting the whole scenario. And as they're doing it, I'm of course documenting everything. But then also I'm trying to eliminate possible knowns at the same time.
Right.
And one of the things I did is they had their coolers still in their truck yet. I flipped the coolers open, completely full of bottled water like they said that they take with them all the time. There was no alcohol. Because that was one of the things in my mind first. Okay, here they are sitting along the water, maybe drinking a beer, kind of kicking back.
That's what we all think when we're doing an investigation.
Exactly.
What were they drinking?
Exactly. Were they doing anything else? No, absolutely not. They repeated their stories like they told me earlier in the morning by phone. They repeated them verbatim. They didn't miss a beat because, like doing investigations, you would take them through the story backwards, midways out, any direction through the story to see if the story remains consistent. And it did. Now, something that was really unusual was when I was talking to the 19-year-old. We were reenacting the event, and we were standing along an access road because, as you know, Salt Fork is fairly remote down there. I mean, here we are in a state park. There's a few houses in the area, but not that close. And this 19-year-old, at any little twig, he was almost jumping out of his pants. He was that scared.
Wow.
And here he'd been down there hundreds of hours, but now for some reason he was just totally terrified. The best comparison I could give to this individual, and it's not in a derogatory way, but he was almost as hyper as Barney Fife. I mean, he's just jumping around back and forth. I mean, fidgety all over the place. And any little crackle, any little sound was setting him off. The 19-year-old, or I mean, not 19-year-old, but the 40-some-year-old was not as bad, but he was very close. He was also extremely high-strung. And he was being completely bothered by the fact he had no clue what happened during that 2 hours and 45 minutes. And, I mean, we went through their story forwards, backwards, and it was incredible on there. And just looking at it from their face value, what they said, it's an incredible story. But this is where also as an investigator, one of the things I do is, one of my investigators called me yesterday and said, basically, he says, you're kind of like a skeptic to people on the outside, but when people get to know you, all of a sudden you're open to all these other options out there. And I said, that's right. I said, because when you do investigations, you have to look at things to a degree from a skeptical point of view. I don't want to buy into everything right away. I want to look at things and kind of prove things out, or as I call it, let's get them passing a litmus test every step of the way. Well, before I met with the witnesses down in the state park, I'd already pulled flight records for that region. And there was only one aircraft that was close to the 11:30 time frame in that area. And it was a possibility because it did pass overhead. So I look at the fact and I make a note, okay, 11:30 time frame, possibly aircraft passing overhead. That could have been one of the lights they saw. But the ones that they saw earlier in the night, that was not the case. There was nothing over in that region that they would have seen at that proximity. So the lights, I have one possibility, one not. Then I looked at a lot of the other details. Okay, I gathered the clothes from them. We took the clothes and we've got those. We're looking at those for evidence. A friend of mine has those right now. Even though it's been some time since the event happened, it takes a while to go back and really do a good analysis. Also, it depends on our time constraints. One of the things we noticed when we looked at the clothes initially was kind of a pinkish cast on a 40-year-old shirt. It was on the back of the shirt, almost where somebody could possibly place a hand. It was a very slight discoloration you could barely make out. There are some other areas on the clothing that went back, were identified as actually paint under a microscopic analysis. Mm-hmm. But the pinkish color, we're not 100% sure, but there is a potential. Again, this is just an outside thought that what if something made contact, it passed over a moisture to the shirt, and it was on the outside of the shirt, by the way, not the inside. Mm-hmm. But maybe it started causing almost like a mold type effect and caused a discoloration. A similar type of appearance, if you remember the Betty and Barney Hill case of the 1960s.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine has fragments of that dress because she's one of the ones who did some later analysis of it. And in comparing kind of the two together, Betty Hill's dress also had a discoloration going from the blue to a pinkish cast on the outside. So one of the thoughts may be, what if there's something touched them and transferred whatever sweat, maybe, whatever, from their body over to the back of the shirt? So there's still possibilities coming out of the analysis of that clothing on there. It'll take some time, but, who knows what we're going to turn up on that side. I've gone back. Matter of fact, that same night that we went down, we were walking the whole region, and I couldn't find anything on different instruments I had. Nothing popped up out of the ordinary. But when I was talking to the 19-year-old in the road, and this goes back to your area now, Kat.
Yeah.
When I was talking to him in the road, I said he was like Barney Fife the whole time. One time he reacted. I felt a sensation off in the same direction he reacted to. And the region where they were at was the region down at Salt Fork where there were several deaths. One was down by, I believe it's by waterfalls back in there, like a small cave back in.
Oh.
And
that's interesting.
He reacted to something back in that direction. And I felt a sensation. I've also had feelings myself. I don't claim to be psychic or nothing like that, but I have sensations at times when I'm out around certain investigations.
Yeah.
And that was the only thing I felt that entire night. When we made our trip back, what was interesting is the 40-year-old's reactions when he was driving. On the way down, he warned me, he said, I drive like a maniac. He says, I go 80 miles an hour all the time on 77.
Oh, so he drives like Henry.
You drive like that, Henry?
No.
Yes.
No.
Oh, my goodness.
Keeps cranking up that flux capacitor.
You put it in cruise control and just go?
That's what I do, yeah.
I thought I was going to go into a different timeline with how he was driving back from one of our locations. It's like Back to the Future.
Well, this guy was almost at that magic, 88 miles an hour?
Yeah, 88 miles per hour.
He was almost there. And believe me, I know that route enough. I'm like, I'm scared of getting a ticket from a state trooper any second.
Yeah.
But I wanted to stay with him all the way down, so I followed him, and he went 80 the entire way down. Wow. And that was from, he lived in the Akron area, Barberton area.
Yeah.
And that was all the way down to southern Ohio, which, we're looking at a couple-hour drive.
Right.
But on the way back, as we're coming back, he's going 80, and all of a sudden I look ahead of us, and at that time of night was probably right around 10:30, something like that, on the way back. He saw a cell phone tower directly ahead of his car. And the cell phone tower had a flashing beacon. Without realizing it, he dropped down to 50 miles an hour. And I'm watching the whole scene from behind. And he's going slow, he's going slow, he's going slow. And once he gets past it, he speeds back up to 80. He didn't even know he slowed down when he saw the cell phone tower, because he saw the flashing lights. Well, we had we got together again a couple weeks after that event, and I wanted to see how they were responding a little bit later on. The 19-year-old was coming back to normal because I think it goes back to youth. Mm-hmm. He was ready to return back to his normal environment much quicker. Mm-hmm. The 40-some-year-old was still beside himself because he'd lost 2 hours and 47 minutes he could not account for. Mm-hmm. When we talked about the events between the night of their sighting and the time I talked to them a couple weeks later, they said for the first few days they never went to work. They do construction. The 40-some-year-old owns his own construction company. Mm-hmm. They couldn't work. Neither one of them could work. They all stayed together, by the way, in the same room, in the living room of their house, and slept in the same room every night for X number of nights in a row after the event. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't go outside after dark because they were terrified. Mm-hmm. And this was just tearing them completely apart.
And don't even get started talking about the Liam Neeson film The Gray.
Oh. Well, we took, and what I didn't tell them, in between the time that they had their event and the 2 weeks after, I went back down myself the following week of their event because they said they were too terrified to go back down, basically. So I thought, well, I'll drive down myself. So I got down there at 3 o'clock in the morning. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I'm going to see if they're here, and I'm going to see if I catch them. Let's see how well their story holds up. Mm-hmm. I got down there. I was down there completely by myself. Nobody was there in the area. The only people in that region were a couple of fishermen who they said kind of stay out all night long and drink with their lanterns on the other side of the lake. Mm-hmm. That part of the story was true. The fishermen were over there. You could hear them doing their chatter all night long. Mm-hmm. So that was factual. Mm-hmm. And what I did is I started doing just another sweep of the whole area using some of the basic things like EMF detectors and so forth. Mm-hmm. I could find no magnetic effects because that was one thing I was looking for, to see if there are any types of residual magnetic effects in the region. Nothing like that, nothing electrical. Couldn't find anything along those lines. But here we go back now to the unique side again, my connection. Mm-hmm. I'm not in the area where they were at directly, but I'm wandering around the whole park in that region, fairly large area. And probably it had to be about between 50 and 100 yards from where they were at, around a U-shaped area, was a large clearing. By this clearing was a large tree. Mm-hmm. And as I'm walking around looking at an EMF detector, I've got a flashlight on it to illuminate because it's completely pitch black down there. There's no ambient light at all to speak of. And all of a sudden I get in an area that I feel, like I mentioned, I have some feelings at times. Mm-hmm. I have this feeling goes through my mind on it. It says, whatever happened right here. I just had this feeling of energy going completely through my body. Mm-hmm. And I looked down at the ground I was standing in. I'm standing in a complete circle of dead grass, as big as my shoulders. Uh-huh. And I'm like, okay, I'm standing in a bullseye. Don't read too much into this right away. But you felt a sensation, and I had the feeling that something was there, and whatever happened right at that spot I was standing in. Well, I didn't tell them about that initially on there because I didn't want to lead them down different little paths. So I kept certain information private from them. But I did have some unique feelings there. When I was doing the talk with the witnesses at their house, as we're talking, again, they were telling me about how upset they are, how everything went on, and that, life is coming a little bit back to normal, but still it's got a ways to go. They're upset about the missing time. All of a sudden, I had a sensation again. And I looked at the 40-some-year-old. I said, we're not we're close to the city, kind of like the suburbs. Mm-hmm. And there's a large forest area across from his house, a wooded area. There's also woods behind it. And I said, I have a question for you. You don't have Indian mounds here, do you? He says, directly across the side of his road from where he lives at, he says, we've owned this property for like 70 years. It's been in the family. He said there are Indian mounds right across the road from where his house is at.
Oh, wow.
And I just had a gut feeling that that's what I was kind of feeling. Something along those lines. There was some sort of I don't know why, but it just felt like it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they've emailed me since, and the key thing that they're at right now is what happened in that time. And I wish I could give them an answer. I really do. Mm-hmm. I just have no answer for what happened to them on there.
Now, I got a question from the chat room from Nyla, and she said, have they done hypnosis regression to find out what happened?
Yeah, well, I was wondering that too.
Yeah.
The 40-year-old was considering it right away after it happened, and I didn't want to encourage that because I thought let's see if things come out on their own naturally first.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's come out, but now we're starting to get to the time frame that this may be a possibility. Mm-hmm. So what I was planning on doing here shortly is reaching back out to him. And I've got somebody who I know that has done regressions. As a matter of fact, they've done my own personal regressions going back. And I trust them very much. I've got the tapes of when mine was done, and I know that she wouldn't lead anybody down a path. Mm-hmm. Because that's one of the big things if somebody does a regression is making sure that they're not being led. And I've heard some people that thought they were doing fantastic regressions of individual. And when you sat back and looked at everything they said, they were really leading the witnesses.
Ah,
right.
And they're putting words in their mouth. And again, I want to make sure that it's done right so it passes, again, that litmus test again, you know?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
It keeps giving the story more credibility the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, and this is one that, I mean, when you see the people and hear their story, they're so passionate about what they're saying.
Right.
They're so intense. And you have that feeling it's not made up whatsoever. Mm-hmm. Because, again, it sounds like it could be similar to some other cases out there in the UFO field. But there's some other things that, when we talked about to come out that are kind of a little bit unique that I don't make open because you want to keep those little things unique to this particular case.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting with how they reacted, sleeping in one room, not doing a lot of stuff at night. It really reminds me of people who have suffered from poltergeist activity. And what really brought to mind was actually the haunting in Connecticut case, and I cannot remember that poor woman's name. Carmen Reed, there we go. Yep. Just how she describes how her family went through that traumatic experience, how they went through shock. They all slept in one room together and were afraid to go around their house. And I find a lot of similarities with these types of cases, with also the alien UFO cases. So I'm always fascinated with that.
Oh, and these two witnesses were just torn apart. Mm-hmm. A couple of things I didn't mention, too, is the wife and the girlfriend had contact with them all night long by cell phone up until when they had their missing time. And then they were able to reestablish it after the event was over. But they even talked all night long as they were fishing down there. The wife and the girlfriend would call up to check on them, see how things are going. And they lost contact at the exact same time. Now, the one thing I wasn't able to pin down is the phone records because I thought it would have been great if I could have got the phone records and all of a sudden if we'd have seen the cell phone signal picking up on a different location. Ah,
yeah.
I was hoping for that, but I couldn't produce anything along those lines. But that would have been a major thing right there. If next thing you know, their signal would have popped up who knows how many miles from where they were at.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, that would have been something like that.
Yeah. This is one of the best ones we had recently, besides one that we had also. It went back to, again, this one was closed, went back to last fall. This one was down closer to your region down there in the Cincinnati area. It was actually, I cannot remember the county off the top of my head, but there was actually a potential landing down there of a craft. Where
Well, Cincinnati's in Hamilton County. We have Warren and Butler County.
it was just north of there. It was kind of like north of Cincinnati, west of or east of Dayton.
East of Dayton?
East of Dayton, right in that region.
Okay.
Where we had an individual report in this case that he was coming around the turn. The next thing you know, he sees a craft along the side of the road.
Wow.
The craft had blinking lights all the way around the outside, and it was hexagonal shaped. It wasn't like totally disc shaped. It was more like a hexagon. And as he comes around the turn, he's watching the object, and the object then raises up, takes off, and he starts following it down the state route as far as he can before he loses it. Our investigators went down there. Again, they did the same thing. They did sweeps of the region. They took their instruments out, anywhere from, like including Geiger counters, and they found nothing out of the ordinary down there. Mm-hmm. The ground also wasn't pushed down because it just hovered above the grass and hadn't collapsed really the grass down for that reason. Mm-hmm. But the details of it were excellent from what the individual turned in. And the night before, there was another object reported, a very similar object about 20 miles from here, above the ground. So you had a correlating case within 24 hours of that same region.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
These are the ones I like the most because we get a tremendous amount of what we get are the lights in the sky.
Yeah.
And as I tell people, 80-90% of the stuff that comes in we can explain with enough information. Mm-hmm. But that 10 to 20%, like is what you really want to go after.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the good stuff.
Oh, yeah.
What's interesting is you'd think they would want to be more stealthy. If they have these anti-collision lights or whatever it is, they're blinking and sort of like, hey, look at us.
It's
pretty
either
cool,
that or, it's either that or maybe, who knows, maybe they're colorblind. I don't know.
Ah. Oh, that's entirely possible. They might not work on the same visible spectrum as us.
Yeah.
That is right. That is right. Exactly. Or who knows, maybe it could be part of maybe a propulsion system for all I know. Mm-hmm. Because about this field of UFOs, who really does have an answer where they truly come from? A lot of speculation. Speculation and guessing.
It is. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take a break.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Paranormal View here on ParaX Radio. We want to thank you all for joining us this evening for a very special conversation with our guest, Thomas Wertman, the director of the State of Ohio's MUFON. Welcome back, Thomas.
Oh, it's good to be back.
The question I have for you is that the reactions that you're getting from these potential abductees seems to be very similar to post-traumatic stress disorder, and I'm wondering, when you analyze the conversations and their experience, you look for commonalities and trigger points to that stress?
Yes. And when I do, like a lot of my investigation, I've got a background also in HR and so forth, and I like to look at body language. And when I talk to the witnesses, I like to really watch the reactions at certain points, see if certain types of topics trip their trigger, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And when I was down there at their house a couple weeks after the event, the 40-some-year-old found out that I was actually doing a talk at the library about 20-some miles from his house. And the topic of my discussion that weekend, it coincidentally happened to be abduction. And he started getting extremely upset because I didn't invite him over to that discussion. And I was watching his body language the whole time, and I said, well, first of all, I said, I didn't want you coming around because if you've had some events, I don't want things that I may discuss potentially contaminate some of the things that you experienced on there, or that may have happened to you on there without you knowing it. And we talked for some time about it, and he was very upset emotionally about it. He says, well, you should have invited me because I would like to talk about this and everything else. And I said, well, it's only been 2 weeks after the event. We need to, really research this before we start doing anything, outside of this realm. And one of the things that kind of got him on there, Barbara, is he looked at me and he goes, what gives you the right to, judge me and to do my investigation on here, And I said, well, part of what I talked about today, and I didn't give him all the details, but part of what I talked about was my own personal experiences going back to the 1960s, where I also had experiences with missing time, the things along those lines, back when I was as a teenager. And we sat down and I discussed, gave him some insight, not complete details, but some insight on my background. And all of a sudden, he was kind of like he took this big sigh and he goes, I guess you have the right to kind of do my investigation and be involved with what I've done because of what your background was itself. And again, just watching his body language, his reactions, and everything else, to me was very telling about, him personally. And again, I had the feeling that he wasn't making it up. He was being very honest, very forthright on there. And no matter how much I tried to kind of trip him up and see if he would make a mistake, he didn't. He kept repeating his story exactly the same. Not that he's exactly the same type of comparison, but when I met Travis Walton and talked to him, I got to spend 3 days with him when he came into one of our conferences. Travis was, again, very set in his mind exactly what happened to him. And you could see that even to this day, all these years later, he was still bothered by the event. And he would talk about it, but you could just see apprehension. Not that he didn't want to talk about it, but apprehension about, I guess you could say, maybe reliving the events again every time he talks about it. And this 40-some-year-old was the same way. He was just extremely upset, primarily the fact that he couldn't explain 2 hours and 45 minutes. That's what was bothering him most.
So he has never had, as you know of, any sort of flashbacks to that time or memories starting to return at this point?
No, not yet. This is why I want to give it some time in between. And what we'll do is we'll take, and now I think it's about time to go back and see if he's open to regression again. See if one of the people I know is able to do it. And let's just go back now and see what comes out. Maybe some things are gradually coming to the surface on their own.
The people that do have these flashbacks or start to recall some of the memories from that time period, are there any common elements to them? Are they looking at the same type of being that abducted them? Or are we looking at multiple races doing the abductions?
Well, speaking from my own experience first, because I've often wondered that maybe there's reasons that people are attracted to, like this field in UFOs, for a reason. One is that maybe we have our own connection back to it. Maybe that's why, like in my own case, I'm so intense, and I would stay up all night long just researching cases, doing investigations. I was doing investigations not only here, but also in Europe, and then going clear down to Puerto Rico. It was almost like, I guess the closest comparison I could make is I pictured myself as being like Richard Dreyfuss, sitting at a table playing with mashed potatoes, trying to form something that I was looking for an answer. And I think in my own case, that's what I was really looking for, is trying to put an answer to this whole thing. So that was why I started going back. And last year I had several regressions. And I didn't remember a whole lot from the period in the 1960s when it happened. But when we did the regressions, things started coming to the surface. And I remembered it, Barbara, I was sitting here at my computer one night. And again, I was dabbling in photographs because I'm fixated on identifying in my mind what I saw. So I'm almost like trying to sketch it out or modify pictures. And I had a picture of a gray. And I started modifying the picture. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting at my computer crying because what I had put together would also start triggering memories that took me back. Took me back to the 1960s on there. And I started kind of reliving in my mind the scenario. And mine was only, in this case, one type of a entity, which was a gray. I've got some friends who've been involved in this field for a number of years. They've also had experiences with different races on there. But it seems like in their case, it was pretty much always the same type of an individual that came back. One of my friends described something like a Nordic type being or Nordic beings, and that's the way they remained. In my case, it was always the grays.
Well, it's interesting because looking back at these experiences, especially in largely unpopulated areas, like the areas you're talking about, how they managed to find two individuals, possibly by campfire, I guess, to abduct, and what led them to single out two individuals out of an area where they could easily go into an inner city and pick people up and probably never be noticed.
Oh, exactly. It makes you wonder why them, number one. Now, on one hand, remote, I can say, okay, that's what I would do. I wouldn't look for somebody necessarily in a city. I'd look for somebody more remote, somebody where I'm not going to be observed as much. But why those two individuals and why not others in that same region? That I don't know. What I've never found out yet would be something that would be interesting to go back now and add some additional questions to the research would be, did their family members have any experiences? For example, especially on the maternal side, that would be the one I'd look at first. Because sometimes what we find out in this field is it seems like it carries down to the maternal side of the family. It goes from, let's say, for example, grandmother to daughter to granddaughter in a sequence. So, that's one thing we look at. Now, I'd like to find out if anybody in their families also had experiences.
Are you suggesting that there's a genetic experiment going on at that point?
Well, that's what it would make me wonder, Barbara, that maybe there is something going on that's genetically related, that they want to see how things pass down from, for whatever reason, generation to generation on there. In my case, my mother, we never ever talked about this subject because I started really getting into it heavy in the later years of her life. It was only one time I was talking to my sister about this. She knows what I do. She knows how much research I've done on this. One night we were talking about where one of my first memories came from, and that was at our grandmother's house. And our grandmother's house was a very rural area. She lived in a one-bedroom farmhouse that they didn't have any, modern facilities at all inside the house. They still had the outhouse outside the house. And it was terrible when you went out to their house in the wintertime and had to go to the bathroom because they had a two-hole outhouse. But I remembered in the 1960s that my grandmother would take me fishing with her during the summer. Now, not to say there's connection with the fishing type things, but I would go spend the night at her house because she liked to go out fishing at 5 a.m. She wanted to be there at daybreak. And one night I was staying in her house, and I don't know why, but I kept staring at the one window because I felt something was there watching me from the outside. It was just like out of the distance. I couldn't see, but it was there. And I told my sister about it. And again, it could go back that you could say, okay, maybe it's just childhood paranoia. But I was talking to my sister about going down to the woods and an object, or not an object, but getting the feeling that something is coming up behind me, and I start running. And I'm heading towards an area that is towards a little small pond that was out there. And if I started drifting to the right, whatever it was would get behind me to my right-hand side and almost kind of like gear me back towards the pond. If I started going to my left, it would get on my left-hand side. I could hear it rustling behind me through the woods. And it was almost like hurting me is the best way to describe it. And I was going towards the pond, and that was the last thing I remembered. Well, when I was talking to my sister about this, she goes, that pond always did scare me every time I was out there. I never did like that pond. And it was really nothing more than a little small pond in the middle of a farmland. Why would we get so scared about it? I don't know. But it was the only time my sister even mentioned something that was kind of unusual with her. But she has no other memories along those lines.
And that's what I love about this type of research, is that everyone is nervous about a certain area, but nobody can quite figure out why. There's never any concrete reason why you should be afraid of an area.
No, and this was just straight open farmland except for woods along the back. And I remember going out there a number of times, and one of the few things you could do on the farm was really just kind of roam around the farmland, and I used to go walking back through the woods. And for some reason, the woods is where I would get paranoid at. I went back to that same area last fall. And when I went back down these country roads at night, I think I went out there maybe 10, 11 o'clock at night, something like that, I started getting nervous when I started getting close to that same area. Now, here I am, 60 years old. Sometimes I call myself mature, sometimes I'm not sure. But experienced enough not to be afraid of that region. But for some reason, I started getting extremely apprehensive of that same area. There's another area I'd also like to check out to see if it kind of works the same way. We lived in Ohio here for a number of years as I was growing up, but we moved to South Carolina for a period of about 5 years. This is where I also had myself personally another event. This was in the late 1960s. I was probably about 13 years old at the time. And you mentioned on there, Barbara, about certain areas. Well, we lived out in the country, again, out in the peach orchards. Me and a buddy used to go hunting all the time. And I use the term hunting loosely because we probably killed more Frigidaires, Maytags, anything else that was abandoned in the field than what we actually did any animal ever. Matter of fact, I don't remember ever killing anything, really. But as we were out on one of our hunting expeditions, we had 12-gauge shotguns. We were going through this wooded area behind my buddy's house, and we started getting deeper and deeper. And he brought up a story, or first of all, he mentioned about, he says, you notice? He says, we don't hear anything out here. I said, what? He says, it's really weird. He says, do you hear anything? I said, no. He says, that's the problem. We don't hear any birds. We don't hear any animals. There's no squirrels, no wildlife back in there. And he was 2 years older than I was, and he started getting nervous again, very excited. He wanted to get out of the woods, and he started talking about a creature back in there that was really, he was describing a Bigfoot, which I didn't know that much about Bigfoot at that time. I'd never really heard that much about it. He's describing a Bigfoot, and I kind of thought he was kind of playing a joke on me, seeing how nervous I would get. But then watching his body language again, he started wanting to get out of the woods. And he started heading not towards his house, but away from his house to the closest little small county road to where we were at. As we're heading towards the road, I remembered looking up and I saw an object, disc-shaped object, fairly large in size, hovering above the treetops from where we were. And I remembered stopping, pausing, looking up, and here this disc was just hovering back and forth among the trees. I'm staring at it. He's going forward. And at that same time, he started talking about seeing a white owl. He says, there's a white owl out here. I said, what white owl? I don't see a white owl. There's a big white owl out here. Well, I kind of glanced down from looking at the object above the trees. I don't see anything. He's still going ahead. And I quit paying attention to the object above the trees just to stay up with him, and we both ended up getting out of the woods as fast as we could. We ended up getting on a small little county road. It wasn't much more than a dirt road. Walking, I don't know how many miles back to our houses. And the whole time there, he's talking about this huge white owl that was in the woods that I don't remember seeing. And when we did the regressions years later, the white owl appears to be going back to a gray. That might have been one of the times I had an encounter with a friend, and maybe the reason it took on, I don't know, I'm just guessing here, maybe the reason it took on the appearance of an owl was to create a semi-friendly image in a child's mind, in a kid's mind, something that they wouldn't be afraid of. But here we are armed with 12-gauge magnums, and we never shot at anything for some reason. All we just kept thinking about is getting away from there, getting away. Mm-hmm. Now, I did go back years later, Barbara, and just for the heck of it, I was Googling Bigfoot sightings, and that road that we lived on was one of the few areas in South Carolina where there's a Bigfoot reported at. It reported like 20 years later.
Wow. Now, the white owl is interesting because it reminds me of the movie The Fourth Kind, in which a lot of, I can't remember the lady's name, who was a psychiatrist, but all of her patients under hypnotherapy kept seeing white owls in the windows.
Right.
Whether, yeah.
Go ahead.
Is it a post-hypnotic suggestion?
Makes me wonder. You know, it made me really, the way I think of it is, it was something like a suggestion that you're not seeing us, you're seeing something else. You're seeing the owl. And again, I just think it was maybe to protect, to the 13 and a 15-year-old from seeing what they really were seeing at that time. And at the same time that around events, this time of events, I'd had a number of periods of sleep paralysis. I'd also started I developed ulcers that they could never figure out why an individual that they started when I was roughly about 11 or 12, why an 11 or 12-year-old would develop ulcers so bad that almost killed me at 15 because they started bleeding so bad they couldn't get them to heal whatsoever. They could never figure out why I was always so nervous about something like this. My grades in school were fine. There was no situations at home which would have created events like this. I kind of always pictured our home life was almost like the old sitcom shows like Ozzie and Harriet, Leave It to Beaver, so forth on there. There was just a normal home life, nothing out of the ordinary. But I think at times now that maybe this is why I'm so attracted to this field, is because I've got a connection. And the regressions tend to bring more of that out. The regressions that we did, I was able to have 3 sessions that each one of them went to be about an hour and a half long. And on I think it was the first one, the person who did the regression said she never heard so much come out on the first session in her life. Because it came out about the encounters of the Greys, being in a large room, dome-shaped room. They remembered seeing several entities in the room. And I don't remember any, per se, instruments being taken to me. I just remember being stared at from a very close distance by something that had eyes that basically penetrated right through you. And it was eyes that you sensed absolutely zero emotion in. And I started putting pieces together in this in a little article I called The Moth to the Flame. Because I kind of feel like I'm the moth being drawn back to the flame, which is the alien flame. That's what brings me to this field.
Mm-hmm. I'm often wondering if MUFON workers, your investigators, whether or not they make themselves more active targets too by investigating what they do. Or do you feel that you could be abducted at any point in time?
Well, I'm at a point in life now that, like, if they come, they come. I can't stop them, that's for sure. But you talked about making yourself more of a target. When I was went down the following weekend down to Salt Fork, when I had that sensation. And also the week of the sighting itself, the day after, when I had the sensations, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a research scientist about that. And I said, why would I have those feelings in that region? She goes, well, maybe they were tuning you in. Maybe they were wondering why you were there so fast after that incident happened. Why are you in that same region? And one of the thoughts was that you always hear about the implants. I don't necessarily say that's the case, at least in my own experience. But maybe since I had potentially had a contact, that maybe there was some sort of a connection there. Because in the regression there, Barbara, at one point, something that came out, and again, I'm kind of reliving this in my mind right now, so if I get a little choked up once in a while, bear with me. What came out was something went wrong. And I kept saying over and over and over again, something went wrong. And what appears that may have happened, and this came out in the later regressions, is that when basically it was looking at me and kind of communicating, I guess you could say mentally with me on there, reading my mind, whatever, there is a point that all of a sudden I could see inside of its mind. And I don't want to say it reacted like in a fear, but it reacted like something wasn't right. This shouldn't happen. That I should not be able to see inside of its mind. And it was almost like, I guess you could say the best way to describe it, when that happened, it was like the hive effect. You felt like the hive where you could feel everything around you. And what happened next was, here I was this 13-year-old kid that may have gone through a number of abductions over the years. And all of a sudden now the role was reversed. You were the one that was in charge. You were the one that was in control of me. And now I'm seeing what's in your mind. And I remembered setting up, and it was telling me you can't set up. It didn't touch me, but it kept trying to tell me lay down, and I wouldn't. And I became the kid that now was the role was reversed. And it was just, every time I think back, it was just a really, it just bothered me every time I think about reliving those experiences on there.
I can imagine. Wow.
Yeah, and I've even had other effects since then, because I was doing an investigation long distance. We didn't have that many people doing investigations in Puerto Rico. because MUFON in some areas is stretched very thin. And I was working some cases down there by phone to help out. And I was talking to a witness who had called our national office and reported seeing an object. And it was just a typical light in the sky that she claimed was following her mom. Her mom takes off down the road, and it did supposedly follow her. But what became more unique is before she said another word, all of a sudden, Barbara, I see myself sitting in a room looking towards windows at night, that the room is completely dark except for the ambient light coming through the rooms or the windows on there. And here I see myself sitting there, and I see an entity standing right in front of the windows. And the next thing she says is, I want to tell you some other experiences that happened to me. I said, what was that? She goes, well, I've seen entities in my house. I said, describe your house. She goes, well, my house, I've got windows going all across the front of it. And I was sitting in my living room looking at the windows one night, and an entity appeared right in front of the windows. I'd seen Barbara everything she was describing before she even said a word.
Wow. Now, would you describe yourself as having empathic or any sort of psychic ability normally?
Well, it's just completely random. There is no control. It just comes, it goes. There's days I can see things as clear as can be before they ever happen. And there's just no control whatsoever over it. Like in this case, what was even more wild was the fact that she, for some reason, this entity I'm seeing was at a lower level than she was. It was short, but also at a low level. And I kept prodding her and leading her. I said, well, you tell me more about your house. Tell me more about this room. Tell me more about that. And finally she says, oh, by the way, the room that we were in, you kind of walk from one level, you step down a half a level. It's kind of like a sunken living room. And that's why I was seeing on a lower level. And I saw all that before she ever mentioned one word.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's why sometimes I wouldn't mind going out and also testing in other avenues, maybe along the paranormal lines, to see if I have feelings, or
Sure.
sensations there.
Sure.
Wow. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and take another break.
In the middle of the Cold War, across remote stretches of the northern United States, the Air Force kept ballistic missiles and B-52 bombers on constant alert. On the night of October the 24th, 1968, at Minot Air Force Base in Minot, North Dakota, Airman First Class Mike O'Connor was dispatched to make a routine repair at one of the missile sites.
We made our turn to come down the road to the missile site, and out of the corner of my eye I observed what I thought was a farmer's yard light, but it looked awful bright. As we proceeded down the road, the object appeared to lift off the ground and parallel us down the road until we came to the missile site, at which point we got out of the truck and it just kind of hovered there.
Staff Sergeant Bill Smith was in charge of security for 10 nuclear missiles. That night he reported seeing strange objects.
These objects would rise, they would speed up, they would slow it down, they would hover, they would dart very quickly one way or the other. We were just not really sure that these were things that we could explain.
The Minot control tower diverted a B-52 to investigate. Captain Brad Runyon was the B-52's co-pilot.
The air traffic controller asked us if we would mind going out to this one area and looking for something. I was curious, and I said, well, what are we looking for? And they said, well, you'll know it if you find it.
The navigator on the B-52, Captain Patrick McCaslin, suddenly identified an object on his radar screen.
I saw a return, faint one sweep, bright the next, large, off our right wing, 3 o'clock, at about 3 miles. And at that point, I asked the radar navigator to turn on the camera, which would then take pictures of whatever was on the radar screen.
These pictures of the radar screen show the object flying in formation with the B-52.
This thing was climbing out with us and maintaining the same heading we were. That was unusual. But what really watered my eyes when this thing backed away and allowed us to turn inside of it.
When the object suddenly disappeared from the radar, the bomber turned back to find it. Co-pilot Runyon was the first to spot what appeared to be a glowing craft hovering near the ground.
When things like that are happening, it seems like time just stands still. My estimate, overall object was a minimum of 200 feet in diameter, and it was hundreds of feet long. It had a metallic cylinder attached to another section that was shaped like a crescent moon. I felt that this crescent moon part was probably the command center. I tried to look inside the thing, but all I could see was a yellow glow. At that point, I was fairly sure that I was looking at an alien spaceship, something that had come here from some other planet other than Earth.
Co-pilot Runyon and the other crew members of the B-52 reported their sighting when they returned to the base. According to Blue Book's investigation, the crew of the B-52 and 16 witnesses on the ground said they saw a UFO that night. In its final report, Blue Book concluded that they were all seeing stars.
None of those pilots saw a star. I know those pilots. I know what their training was. I know how many stars they'd seen in the course of their careers, and they were not looking at a star. It bothers me that Blue Book blew it off. I don't think this incident has ever been adequately explained.
The Air Force finally got out of the business of trying to explain UFOs in 1969. It closed down Project Blue Book after an independent commission concluded that UFOs were of no scientific interest.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Paranormal View here on ParaX Radio. We want to thank you all for joining us this evening. Especially thank you to all of our listeners from all around the world. And tonight we have listeners in the United States, Canada, the Netherlands, Australia, the United Kingdom, and Unknown is back.
Oh,
yes!
The unknown.
Probably, yeah.
They want to find out what we know about them.
Probably, yes, very much so. They want to catch up on what's been happening in the MUFON world with our very special guest, Kenneth Wertman. Welcome back.
Thomas.
Hi.
Yes,
Thomas.
Yeah.
That's right. I've been called a lot in my lifetime, believe me.
Wow. Every one of us have managed to mess up your name somehow tonight.
That's right. And my mail, the only one that comes in the right name most of the time is occupant, you know?
You're with that group Muffin, right?
That's right. We're muffin men out there. You got that right.
Oh, wow.
No, yeah.
That's all right. We have to laugh at ourselves, you know.
We do, especially when we start to take ourselves way too seriously. That's probably the time to get out of the business for any of us.
We were at a conference not long ago, and somebody says, "I have an unusual question for you." I said, "Wait a minute, you're at a UFO meeting saying you have an unusual question? Give me a break."
Now, I got a question. With stories like this with the B-52 pilots, why is there so many different credible witnesses and stories like that, and they want to blow it off and say that they are just looking at the stars or some other anomaly?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think at that time, going back to the 60s when that happened, Blue Book, depending on who was in charge, seemed to be more out to disprove or, discredit people than really do good, serious investigation. One of my friends has some of the Blue Book files. Coincidentally, they were found in a garage. and he bought them on Craigslist, just to give you an idea how some weird stories come up. But when you look at the investigation behind them, it's very superficial. Because in the boxes of case files that are marked declassified by the person in charge of the book at that time, his name was Quintanilla. He did classify these documents, but Quintanilla himself was a skeptic. He didn't buy into this whole thing. He would be the first one probably to try to discredit stuff, because when he did a case in Portage County, like in this case the Air Force one was 1968, there was one in Portage County in 1966 involving deputy sheriffs. Quintanilla's first comment, basically, deputy sheriffs, was, "Tell me about this mirage that you saw." Now, I don't know about you, Henry, but if somebody looked at me doing an investigation and said, "Tell me about the mirage you saw," and I chased a UFO for 86 miles from Ohio into Pennsylvania, the thing had come directly over me, and the deputy described the object as being so bright it was like looking down the gates of hell, and it was as big as a house. And he told me that basically I was looking at Venus. It would have got really ugly. But that was the type of things that were being done at that time.
And I guess they actually felt like people would believe whatever they say that way?
Or at least try to discredit it and make people look, feel foolish, like they're chasing Venus or whatever.
Right.
But I've got a letter in my possession that was from this congressman out of Michigan in 1966. Was very upset because he had all these sightings basically in his own backyard in Michigan, and that he thought that the government should do some very serious investigation on this subject. Signed, Gerald Ford.
Oh.
Now, what happened after that once Ford got in the White House? Nothing.
Nothing. I think because they learned certain things that they can't disclose, and so therefore they have to put a hush on everything.
And I would go along with that opinion that they're basically told you don't need to know.
Right.
And I think you can go through the whole line of ones in succession. Carter, it was my understanding he was also debriefed, and he doesn't say anything about it.
Right.
And even though he had his own UFO sighting. Reagan. Matter of fact, if you want to get into one of the more unique ones on there, it goes back to Tricky Dick Nixon. And his supposed connection of having a friend of his be able to be allowed onto an Air Force base in Florida, Homestead Air Force Base.
Is that the one with Jackie Gleason or something?
With Jackie Gleason.
Yeah.
And he supposedly got Gleason permission to see the aliens. And some people may not know that Gleason was actually a big ufologist. He had a massive library on UFOs, and his house even looked like a UFO. But, I mean, each one in succession, I think that once they get in there, they probably are told, this is beyond your realm. You don't have any need to know what's going on. And that's it, period. They just shut them off.
Now, Kat, you got a question from the chat room?
Yeah, we do. Sherry in chat asked, have any star maps of alien worlds been confirmed?
Well, the one of Betty and Barney Hill, that's the one that stands out the most as people recognizing. And again, I just a little bit more on the skeptical side where, testing people's memory, what they're seeing and patterns.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I'm also open-minded to the fact that I would like to see some of these star maps, even ones which have not been supposedly proven, and look at them not in 2D as we would from the Earth, but from three-dimensional, from different directions. And I think we may be able to find something that can be popping out.
Wasn't there a teacher that years later created a three-dimensional mapping of the stars from that star map from the perspective of a different site looking at Earth, and essentially came up with the correct pattern?
Yeah, that's the one going back to Betty and Barney Hill.
Yeah.
And that's where I think, that you have to look at things three-dimensionally.
Right.
Look at them from a perspective not of our own, but that's the one that stands out in my mind as being the most recognizable on there.
Yeah, because some of the stars in the pattern hadn't even been discovered yet.
That's right.
Like Betty and Barney Hill with it.
That's it. Kind of goes back to that movie.
Interrupted Journey.
Blank. No,
Interrupted Journey.
Well, they're
Right.
K-Pac.
Oh, okay. K-Pax.
Yeah. With Kevin Spacey. Yeah.
With Kevin Spacey on there, where he's able to identify a world that nobody knew about until just now.
Now, this brings me to a question, Thomas, about the NASA ISS feed. Does anybody in your group actually monitor the cameras coming off the International Space Station? And are they viewing some of this? I know that there's claims that NASA has cut the video feed on several occasions.
I don't know of anybody in particular in your organization who's monitoring that like 24/7. I've seen the reports on there where, individuals are claiming that the feeds have been cut. I don't want to sound like the skeptic again, but the reality is they do lose signal when they go around the world at certain points. And that's why, before I'd want to make a claim like that myself, I'd want to really look at it from all sides just to make sure it wasn't one of those points, because one of the battles that we fight in not just like our field in UFOs, but reaching out to paranormal, is the stuff that you find on YouTube all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That people put such tremendous work into putting something together on YouTube that really doesn't have any substance behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does is it opens up a whole can of worms and gets people believing stuff or looking at things maybe not as close as they should. They should look at them a lot closer before they publicize it.
I think they do a lot of that anyway.
They do, and what it does is it makes the ones doing good research sometimes look bad.
Yes,
and I've always told people that why do we need the government to come out and start discrediting stuff? Like, let's say, go back to Project Blue Book. Why do we need them to come out and discredit anything? When I could go on YouTube, you could turn me loose on the computer with Photoshop and a couple video programs, and I could do more damage in one day than an organization like Blue Book could probably do in 10 years. Just by putting out disinformation that way.
Oh, yeah.
And the programs they have, even for the amateur, are amazing. There's a fantastic fan video of shots of San Francisco, even with loose camera movements, not on a tripod or anything, where they've put in that in the sky you can see Star Destroyers and the Death Star, and it looks perfectly natural, like that's part of San Francisco.
Oh, and I know.
That's George Lucas.
But
no, this was some fans put this together. Yeah.
No, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and I see some fans putting together way better stuff than what you see on Sci-Fi Channel. I hate to say it.
Oh God!
Oh yeah. Yeah.
They should hire them because they'd get a lot better work for a lot cheaper price.
Well, let me ask you: if the aliens are visiting here, do they or do they not want to be seen? Because every time somebody says something, it's, oh, they had all these lights underneath it or all these lights around it or whatever. Why wouldn't they be in stealth and in black so nobody would even know they're here?
I'd be honest with you, Henry. Here I go, Miss. My turn now. But Henry, the reality is I don't know. I really don't know. They don't care? They may not care. Who knows? I don't think anybody truly has the answer on that one. Why don't they go in stealth mode? Good question.
Well, I would assume that if they can travel all these millions of miles and all this stuff, that they should have the ability to be invisible, you might say. Yeah.
Exactly. Turn your lights off, or, well, like when people up here around Cleveland say they see something coming in. Well, I look at the fact that, they may be seeing an object out there. Why isn't it picked up on radar? Well, if we've got stealthy aircraft that can't be picked up on radar, why would we even begin to think that they would be any different?
Right. Yeah, which is true.
Of course, there's theories that our stealth technology is reverse engineered alien technology.
And there's been that question out there for years: that have we gotten help from somebody, or have they found something, reverse engineered it? That's very likely because, in my opinion, I don't think that even though that this race may be in theory, who knows how many years ahead of us, hundreds, thousands of years.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, look what we've done in the last 120 years.
Right.
And if they're that many more years ahead of us, just think what they might be.
But I'd also think that they could be prone for error just like we could.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That they're going to have something potentially go wrong too, because I can't picture them being infallible.
Right.
That they're going to have a crash. They're going to have something they didn't anticipate, something go wrong. And there's got to be some evidence out there that's being gathered.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then you get the classic the government conspiracy aspect that if it were to crash in an actual town somewhere, the government would go in, cordon it off, kill everybody who's seen anything, and say, "Oh, there was an outbreak or something," and cover it up that way.
That's it. And that's part of the reason, though, we've got, like in our case, the STAR team, that we want to get somebody there within a few hours after something happens, like in my case in Ohio, before the government ferrets it away someplace.
Right.
That actually kind of brings me to the point, wasn't the MUFON conference in Ohio this year the theme, the media, MIBs, and orbs?
Well, we had the media in there. It was actually James Fox, who's done 2 tremendous documentaries.
Okay.
I Know What I Saw and Out of the Blue. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, he is a man that's very passionate about this subject. Mm-hmm. And he even got, in this case, Jimmy Carter on on camera to try to talk about his UFO experience. He tried to do it for a long time, and to get Carter on there talking about it, he actually sent his father up, who was a quadriplegic in a wheelchair, and his dad was mic'd.
Wow.
And he had his dad ask him the question, "Tell me about your UFO experience." And Carter started answering it, and he's like, I got to get out of here. I don't want to answer any more of these questions, even if the guy's a quadriplegic. But he's put out, if anybody wants to see him, 2 of probably the best documentaries on this. And he's working on a 3rd one now called 701, which is based on the number of unsolved Blue Book cases.
Oh.
Now, we got another question from the chat room.
Yeah, we do. It just came in. It's from Cy, and he asks, what kinds of radiation saturation effects would be needed to duplicate the type of radiation in hydrophobic soil that we are seeing from UFO landings?
That one, I wish I can't answer that one, unfortunately. That's not my specialty.
Okay.
If one of my friends was here that's a scientist, I'm sure she would gladly give you the answer on that one.
Okay. If Cy wanted to know the answer, who could he contact at MUFON to ask?
They would have to probably refer him to just a general MUFON number, and they would look out to one of their scientists or one of their contacts on there. They'd send it down line. Because everything is dispersed pretty much out of our main office out in Oxnard, California.
Okay.
Or I should say Irvine, California. I'm thinking of Oxnard right now.
Irvine is so not Oxnard. I'm just saying. I don't know where I heard this, and I don't know if it was an article or a documentary, but somewhere there was something that some millionaire either contributed a ton of money to MUFON or essentially bought MUFON so that all of the, and somehow got legislation, almost secret legislation passed, that all of MUFON's findings would go to him. He's like some reclusive millionaire or something, and I don't know where I heard this.
He's not really so much reclusive on there, Jeffrey. I know who you're talking about. It's Bob Bigelow.
Yeah, yes, that's what I heard about.
Bigelow Aerospace. I don't know all the details, to be very honest with you about it, but I do know that he gave MUFON, I think it was roughly right around $500,000 towards doing investigations. And that goes back to the group before I got involved with them called the STAR Team. So if something happened, that we would have people immediately on site. So that way there's money for, let's say if you're in a state like Texas, which is fairly large, you need to get somebody on the other side of the state, there's money there for airline tickets and stuff, and also to fund the investigations. All the extents of money I really can't answer on there. How much exactly was given, where all it went to. My area is pretty much in Ohio. We didn't see any of it here in Ohio at all. Mm-hmm. But the idea was he was wanting to get information back. How much he got, I couldn't really tell you. But he wanted information, and to me, he owns Bigelow Aerospace. And I can't argue the fact that, if he owned Bigelow Aerospace and he says, well, what if I can put some money up like this? Because I think eventually there could have been up to $750,000 before that he pulled the funding. But if he would have got one artifact that we could have obtained, in his sense, that could have been worth billions or trillions of dollars. Mm-hmm. And I can see why the funding would have been there. But the funding was eventually pulled. And to my knowledge, there's nothing anywhere out like that right now going on. But that goes back, I think, about 3, maybe 4 years ago on there. Something like that.
I got a question. This person wants to know. Apparently, she was awake in the bedroom, and she seen 2 lights up in the corner of the ceiling, and an alien face bending down, leaning to one side, bent down to look at her from the wall. Would that maybe indicate alien contact?
I couldn't say it wouldn't. It could be that she's having, maybe she is being contacted at time. But also, this is where we'd have to do more research. And what I'd recommend her to do is, file a report with MUFON, because if something is current, or even if something goes back a number of years, we still like to see these reports so that we can take and follow up. We can take and research them, document them on there, and maybe we can find correlations between cases. In her case, it'd be interesting to go back and find out, is this just a one-time thing, or has it been happening over a period of time, maybe going back years?
I believe this just happened. This one thing like this has only happened this one time that I know of. She said she was wide awake, heard someone in the other room on the computer typing. It looked like it was a bright light in the room, and kind of zoned out thinking of nothing before she saw it, and it leaned its head over, looked at her, and it was like a typical gray alien from the upper chest up, and it tilted its head sideways and looked at her.
Yeah, this is one I think where we'd have to do a lot more, research, a lot more talking to the witness, getting as many details, more details as we can. Just on a short, first time in looking at this, I don't want to go either way, because this could be one where maybe she is having an experience, but on the flip side, with so much information on TV, again, not to say that this is in the case here, but so much stuff on TV that people can be in that state, of going to sleep or just waking up, that they could have memories of what happened earlier in the evening on there, something they might have watched. So these are more details you'd want to fill in. Was she watching other shows? Does she do a lot of research in this area? Something which may have contributed, or maybe, and again, I'm not saying in this case, but maybe imagining something like that, just to eliminate that.
Okie doke. We do have another question from the chat room, Kat?
Yep. Okay, Sai asks, how far away does a UFO have to move away before a car can be able to start up again?
I don't think there's been any documented information on exactly how far that has to be. In the area that I work at right now was where they had the Trumbull County event in the 1990s, where he had Officer Toby Marrero had a UFO come over his car that killed the car engine. And he didn't give any specific distance that it left before his car was able to restart. But one of the things that, in this case, what makes it a little bit more challenging too is when you hear him describe it on the TV shows that most people see, when the object left his car engine and restarted, well, that wasn't the true case. The lights came on, but the engine itself didn't turn over because the ignition switch would have had to been. So it'd have to travel so far, mainly for like the electrical system itself to come back up, which have been like the sirens if they were on, and the lights.
And that takes into account that it's the ship automatically interrupting the electrical system as opposed to something that they're manually controlling.
That's right. That's right. So it's just something automatic from it on there that caused it to completely die out. But again, there's no exact distances that I've seen on any of these cases, other than the object was either like coming overhead when the car engine died out.
Now,
but again, they didn't know that distance.
Our time is quickly running right on by, and we've got way too much more to actually try and get into. One thing that I wanted to ask about was on the site, you had the Mike Wallace interview with Donald Kehoe in 1958. If people has not went and looked at that, you need to go to the MUFON site and look up the Mike Wallace interview with Donald Kehoe. My question on this, because he was answering everything to me just right, but Mike Wallace kept saying, well, the government give me these papers, which contradicts what you're saying. Again, the government is giving people misinformation because they don't want to believe in UFOs to start with, so they're going to believe what the government's saying so they can tell these people, well, it ain't right.
And that's a great one right there that you think of, like in this case, Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes all those years, and you find out that he did a UFO, in this case, interview with Kehoe back in the 50s. And Kehoe, they discussed what the whole conversation was going to be over during that interview, and Kehoe started drifting from the topic. And that's when they cut his mic. And they cut him off the air. And people called in complaining to CBS about that. But the thing is there are guidelines given on what to discuss and what not to discuss on there. Again, it goes back to the government control, and you'd think that we should have the right to know what's going on out there. What's going on above our skies, number one, for national security. Or not just, as mentioned earlier, who knows how many billions of miles they're coming here from, but what if they're coming from another dimension or have some other means of traveling that we have no idea about, maybe even another time, for all I know. It seems like we should have the right to know what's going on.
Now, we've got the people in the chat rooms begging us to have you come back on again sometime.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, gladly.
Yay!
They believe a lot of stuff I told them tonight?
Now, Henry, Thomas is the kind of voice we should have during the intro.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you like that? Well, one of my guys told me that I have the golden voice, and if I really want to turn it up, I do. And I told him today it's a good thing I have the golden voice for radio instead of the face for radio.
Well, you're definitely like movie trailer voice. So
I appreciate that.
In a world.
Before we go off, I want to bring up something that we were talking about before the show started, and that is you were saying that UFO sightings have increased over the last couple of years, and I'm wondering by how much, and do you have any theories as to why that is?
Well, when I got into MUFON, I started with MUFON 6 years ago now, and we were only getting in about 100 and maybe 50 cases at that time of year. Mm-hmm. Now, this year, we're probably looking at doubling, and I just checked a few minutes ago. We've got, of the cases which have come in the last 90 days, we've got 71 cases open right now in the state of Ohio that's come in within the last 90 days. And one of the things that's been helping is, first of all, the Hangar 1 TV show that we have out.
Yeah.
That just finished its season now. And we're getting a lot more inquiries because people are seeing the show, and it's being presented in a good manner, because some of the shows that were out there in the past weren't that good, to be honest with you. Some of them kind of made a mockery of things. They misled people. And this show's a big step in the right direction. Mm-hmm. That's helping people start to report, because they know now that MUFON is out there and aware of who we are. Mm-hmm. Also, I think you're seeing, too, number one, more people are open about discussing this stuff than what they did in the 1960s. I'm a director in a college, which I don't know if the people know the college I work at, the higher-ups know what I do in my hobby. They'd probably crap if they'd see about 20 pages of Google notes on me out there. But my students know what I do. Other faculty members have known what I've done for years, and actually treat it very openly on there. They don't laugh. They don't make a mockery of it, because I think they're also looking for a question. And a lot of them have actually had their own experiences. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just getting people more willing to talk. Over the last 4 years, I've conducted programs on the outside, a lot at libraries, some at conferences. But in the library ones, we've been drawing great responses, and I think it's a fantastic way to present to the general public what MUFON is, what we're all about, case we've worked on, and bring things out in the open. I'm doing one in a couple weeks in Westlake at Porter Library, where the last 3 times we've had 125 people there.
Wow.
And we've had to shut the doors because of fire code. We can't let any more in. But the response is tremendous on there. People just want to hear more about this subject. They're excited about it. And I think that's why the number of cases has gone up. You're getting people much more open than they ever have been in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what if someone wanted to be one of the people that works with MUFON to go out and investigate?
Okay, to be a field investigator, the thing about that is they've got to get a manual, which they have to purchase from our website. And when they purchase a manual, it gives them guidelines for things that they need to know on being an investigator. How research is being conducted, how evidence is being gathered. And it gives them a foothold of, the substance behind it. I also tell everybody that if you're expecting to go out and make tons of money at this, it's not going to happen either.
That's like a radio show.
You got that right. They tell you the pay always stays the same, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, in this case, our investigators, all the ones here in Ohio, we get absolutely nothing. We do it on our own. We buy our equipment. Anything we need, we fund it on our own here. So they've got to expect that. And once they get the manual, they study it, they take a test, they pass it. What we do here then is when somebody passes a test, I assign them to a mentor under one of our investigators. Mm-hmm. And so what they do is they start doing cases under the guidance of other field investigators. Mm-hmm. And then as they get more fluid with it, they get comfortable with it, and we turn them loose, and we let them start doing their own. Right now, we've got 13 investigators in the state of Ohio.
Mm-hmm. That doesn't sound like a whole lot.
It seems like a lot, but the thing is you've got the higher concentrations.
Yeah. I mean, as big as the state is, 13 is not too many.
No, but here's another thing. Project Blue Book only had like 3 or 4.
Oh, my goodness.
For 25,000 cases. So that's another reason why they couldn't really do as much depth as probably some of them wanted to on there.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I'm not saying that some of the ones down at Blue Book didn't want to do the right job, but also they may not have been allowed to do the right job.
Well,
but go ahead.
We want to thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight. Really appreciated it. Everybody just loved the show. So what I want you to do is take a minute to go ahead and let people know how they can get in contact with you, website and all that stuff. And then we'll give all our stuff out, and we'd like for you to stay on for a minute or two after we get off the air.
Sure. Anybody who's interested in joining MUFON can either go to our national website at www.mufon.com. It gives them information on how to become a field investigator, or if they want to join up as a member, there's also memberships there. If they want to become part of MUFON of Ohio, we've got our MUFON Ohio website at ohiomufon.com. And if you go to the website on there, you can also join up as a subscriber. Or if you want to attend a public meeting, we have one tomorrow at the Hilliard Public Library in Hilliard, Ohio at 2 o'clock. And the one final one is if you want to attend the Cleveland Ufology Project, we've got our meetings the third Saturday of every month. And if you check our website at clevelandufo.com, give you all that information.
All right. Jeff?
I'll see how much I can do this from memory. You can go to my website at jeffgould.net, GEOFFGOULD.net. And if you add the /2011PNV.htm, that's my Paranormal View hub page where you can see previous shows, if I can ever get my computer working again. And podcasts are on that page and on the Spectrum Report page. If I can ever get on there to finish the report page I had started on tonight's show, there'll be links to MUFON, to Thomas's website, and all that stuff. And you can find us on Facebook. Just search for the Paranormal View community. There we are. Please like our page. We're also on Twitter. Cat will get to, but you can follow me on Twitter at Real Badger, RealBadger. I try and be funny a lot.
and you can follow the Paranormal View on Twitter at Paraview Radio. You can also follow me and my graphic novel series Jinxed on Twitter at Jinxed Comic. You can also find it at jinxedcomic.com. And you'll see me at the Rhode Island Comic Convention this November.
All right. And next week, I don't think Kat will be, but I will be at the Post-Town Elementary School at the event that they have there. We'll have a booth, and so if you're in the neighborhood, buy a ticket, drop by, say hi to us. Lots of famous people will be there that is in the paranormal field, and we will see you then. I don't have it pulled up right now, but in the weeks coming up, we have got some great guests lined up, so you'll be able to listen to some other great folks.
Well, we have James Willis, the author of Weird Ohio, coming up July 25th.
Cool.
And I really, really suggest everyone come in and listen because he is a great speaker. I've met him many times personally, and I own, I think, every one of his books.
Yeah, we got large libraries, don't we?
No, I'm not a fangirl or anything.
All right. Until then, this is Henry Foister.
Jeffrey Gould.
Barbara Duncan.
And Kat Cloco.
Until next week, we will see you then. So, good night, everybody.